Last week, we got part 3 of Game Theory's timeline, and I want to talk about it. One, because discussing and debating each other's theories is how this community can work together to solve things. And two, the algorithm really likes it when I talk about bigger content creators, so you gotta get them clicks. Anyway, transparency aside, slices, put on your aprons, and let's make ourselves some theory critique. And to be clear, as always, just because I don't agree with or don't like an interpretation that anyone has made, but especially in this video, Game Theory or MatPat, it doesn't mean that I dislike or am discrediting them in any way. These kinds of timelines take a lot of work, and I don't want to discount that in my critique of it. Straight away, honestly, most of this part of the timeline I agree with. Well, at least I can understand where it's coming from. FNAF 6 and Ultimate Custom Night are super solid, and I agree that even though the encyclopedia would have us believe otherwise, Michael feels like the right protagonist for FNAF 4, and honestly for most of the games. A lot of the what of this timeline I'm in agreement with. My main issue, however, is the when. Something that MatPat readily admits is foggy.
With Mike's quest for revenge, you might have noticed that I was vague about the dates, and there's a good reason for that. I don't know him. There is no good way for me to make him fit in.
And he's right. We don't have a lot of clear answers on that. Frankly, I think part of that is due to the frequent reworks the story received throughout the franchise. It's pretty clear that FNAF 1 was just supposed to be there, FNAF 2 built upon the original story, and FNAF 3 was meant to close it. But when things didn't quite add up, Scott tried to rework it into a dream theory with FNAF 4, and then the community was very loud in the fact that dream theory kind of sucks and it's unsatisfying. So he tried to rework that into a workable actual timeline, so on and so forth, and here we are with Security Breach. That being said, Scott had the nearly impossible task of taking these disparate pieces and somehow stringing them together in a cohesive timeline, and trying to make them fit together chronologically. Therefore, our task of figuring out that chronology is made infinitely more difficult. The best any of us can do, frankly, is try to settle on a few facts and assumptions and then see where the placement lends itself to. And that's where my personal beliefs on the timeline really differ from game theory. The assumptions we're using, and in using them, the order of events. One of the pieces of evidence they've used to link Michael and his activity is the repeated firing of tampering with animatronics and odor. This is often used to link a post-sister location Michael to FNAF 1 and 2. After all, a rotting corpse would smell pretty bad. But I think there's a different explanation here that can bring Michael to FNAF 1 and 2 without being dead already. We know from Help Wanted that Fazbear is willing and able to use frivolous excuses to fire employees, especially if they can blame a problem on said employee and say they fixed it by firing them. Now, what are we told about the animatronics in FNAF 1 and the wizards in FNAF 2? They have an acrid, disgusting smell, almost like something is rotting inside of them. If your animatronics are starting to bug out and glitch in ways that are freaking out your guests and smell terribly, what's easier for a company, specifically a company that's shady as hell, actually take the time, money, and resources to look into your robots and figure out what's wrong? Or just point to the night security guard and say, actually it's his fault, don't worry, we fired him, it'll get better soon. This solution works, but I admit it comes with a lot of issues. First off, if Michael is an Urpel, why is he going after the FNAF locations? He'd have no reason to want to be anywhere near the places. Frankly, knowing his history, he'd probably want to avoid them. And if sister location hasn't happened yet, already? And if sister location hasn't happened, he shouldn't know about William's crimes yet. But why shouldn't he? The security logbook tells us a lot about Michael, his psyche, what he's been through, but most importantly, we see Michael communicating with spirits in this book. Michael can talk to these ghosts, maybe just Cassidy and the crying child, but that would be enough. Not only that, but like Squawks mentions in his recent misconceptions video, Michael outright states that he thinks all these locations are crazy, but no one ever seems to take him seriously. Link here to watch the full video. Michael seems to have plenty of an inkling that something is wrong with these places. And if he's able to communicate with Cassidy or the crying child, he'd know who was responsible for all these disappearances and deaths around these locations. His father, the very same one he's already trying to escape from. It's very likely Michael knew the culprit of the missing child incident, and knew that they had been stuffed into the animatronic suits. Okay, I should be approaching the rectangle now, and I think that's... Oh, the rectangle was the monster. that was almost bad. If the rectangle's the monster, then is the other symbol the door? Not sure. Oh, a sponsor. Okay, this might help. Today's video is sponsored by Morgan & Morgan Injury Law Firm. Injured and don't know where to start? With Morgan & Morgan, it's so easy because they are a 21st century law firm. They've modernized the whole process. You can submit case details, sign contracts, send pictures, all from your phone. In fact, with Morgan & Morgan, you can submit a claim without ever having to leave the couch. You don't need to visit a law office. You don't even have to put on pants. On your phone or on a computer, in 8 clicks or less, you can submit a claim with Morgan & Morgan. And why wouldn't you want to? They're America's biggest injury law firm, which means they have the resources to fight for you. And they fight. They've recovered over $15 billion in assets for their clients. And with a fee that's free, it just makes sense. You only pay if you win. There are no upfront costs, sign-up fees, or anything like that, especially if you get into something like a car accident. Obviously, you want to make sure you and the other person are okay, call the police for a report, and call your insurance. But you need to get legal representation with stuff like this. It just makes sense to protect you and your assets. And that legal representation could be Morgan & Morgan. If you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. You can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less without having to leave your couch. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/rytoast or dial #law. That's #529 from your cell phone. Thanks again to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's video. Morgan & Morgan, for the people. I didn't get anything for that one. Oh, the monster's gone. Oh, thank goodness. Wow, talk about protection. Okay, so if the square was a monster, that symbol has to be a door. All right, come on. We're getting out of here. So when the FNAF 2 location goes under investigation, Michael wants to make sure that William can't get away with it again. He'd see that the location was hiring a night shift security guard right after the investigation shut its doors. He wanted it. He would get to where the authorities would never think to look. The animatronics. Go there and rip them open. Expose the crimes of his father. Get him locked up for good for what he's done. But when he does, he doesn't find anything. This time, William didn't stuff his victims. We see them scattered about. The police already found and collected those bodies. William had gotten away with it, and all Michael got was footage of him tampering with the animatronics. I think this is the most logical explanation for why Mike would be hired to the FNAF 2 location after an investigation has already begun, but would have used a fake name and be fired on the same day. Heads up, this might sound like a headcanon, and it might be, but this next part I think makes a lot of sense, and it ties up some loose ends that we don't have any answers for right now. But you let me know. I think it's possible that Michael was the victim of the bite of 87. Hear me out. We hear directly 2 things about the bite of 87.
They used to be allowed to walk around during the day, too, but then there was the bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe.
A few things about this one. Even if you discredit this TV screen in FNAF 4 to say that the FNAF 4 minigames take place in 1983 and you think this bite is 1987, there's 2 pieces of information that contradict this. The only information we have on the bite of 87. Freddy isn't in a free roam mode, he's on a stage. And the crying child doesn't survive. He very clearly dies. We know that the FNAF 2 animatronics roam freely. And we know the victim of this bite survives. So if Michael, presumably in Fazbear Night Guard uniform, starts trying to take apart these animatronics, it makes perfect sense that they would try to defend themselves. This would give us another reason why Mike was fired. If Michael's injury was an accident on the fault of Fazbear Entertainment, they'd have to pay him workers' compensation for years at least, let alone the legal damages from that accident. But if his tampering caused the issue, and the subsequent paper trail of firing was there to back it up, then they'd have a case to not pay him anything. They could sue him for damages. Even more, how narratively satisfying is it that both sons were bitten by one of these creations? While Michael was in the hospital away, it was then that William began to take the scrapped toy animatronics from the FNAF 2 location, melt them down, and inject the remnant into the fun times. And now at this point, FNAF 1's placement is a little odd. I tend to think that Michael goes to the sister location before FNAF 1. 1, mainly because of motivation, but not the motivation of Michael, the motivation of the person who opens the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza we see in FNAF 1. Before Sister Location, William doesn't really have a reason to open up a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He's got Remnant in the toys, robots in the fun times, and if he needs more experiments, he can simply rent out one of the fun times, kidnap a kid, and bring them back. He's got it made in that bunker. However, after Sister Location, William is left with nothing. The fun times are gone and all the remnant he put in them is gone with them. He would need to restart somewhere. Open up a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with all the original animatronics, either to maybe kidnap some new kids or even just try to lure back the fun times since half of their souls are in this pizzeria. Think about the immense upgrade that the Wizards got from FNAF 2 to FNAF 1. Who in the franchise could do that except for William and Henry? And we have no reason to believe Henry would open up the FNAF 1 location. That being said, if FNAF 1 happens after Sister Location and William isn't spring-locked, why would he send Michael down to Sister Location instead of himself? Well, self-preservation. After a point, it's pretty obvious that the fun times are hyper-aggressive, especially towards William. I mean, they kill Michael thinking he was William at the time.
They thought I was you.
And then they wear his skin. So obviously going down there is an issue for William now, but he needs to continue his experiments. Who better to do that than a son who just got out of the hospital and is dazed and confused? Not to medicalize the FNAF timeline or trivialize a medical condition. I really don't want to dismiss or diminish anyone who's actually affected by frontal lobe damage, but just going off of what I found on the internet, the frontal lobe is supposedly responsible for memory, judgment, and a few other things. Logically, if you'd been in a coma for quite a while and woke up with some memory impairment and issues with judgment, and the first thing you get right out is your own father telling you, hey, I need you to do this for me. Sure, you might have some foggy memories of not trusting him, but it's your father. Where else are you going to go? So you'll listen to him. And thus, we get Sister Location. The plot of this game happens as normal, but as it's happening, Michael begins to remember more and more. He remembers his sister, his brother, and finally, once Ennard guts him and wears him like a reverse Iron Man, the remnant and memories of the missing child incident victims course through him. By the time they vacate his body, he knows all too well what William did, and he vows to right it.
I'm going to come find you.
So then, what about FNAF 1? Does that happen next? Yes, but I want to take a second to approximate some dates. We know thanks to the paychecks received in FNAF 2 that game takes place in 1987. But more than that, after the 5th night, you get a paycheck dated for 11/12/1987, a Thursday. But if you complete the 6th night, you get the newspaper of the restaurant closing and another paycheck dated 11/13/1987, a Friday. Friday the 13th, actually. So if we use the logic that a 5-day paycheck is given on a Thursday, but the 6th additional overtime paycheck is given on a Friday, we can cross-reference those checks with the dates we get in FNAF 1, also dated November 12th and 13th, respectively. Looking at the years after 1987, the next few candidates that have a Friday the 13th are 1992, 1998, and 2009. Straight away, I feel like a gap of 22 years between FNAF 2 and FNAF 1, it feels too far. Especially considering that Circus Baby Pizza World opened soon after FNAF 2 and closed very quickly. There's a big empty gap there. But pause, how do we know that's where Circus Baby Pizza World is? There's a hand unit dialogue we get early in Sister Location.
Due to the massive success and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
Before FNAF 1's location, we only have 2 Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The original one that opens up during the run of Fredbear's Family Diner, and the FNAF 2 location under the same name as a reboot. We have no direct information on how long the original Freddy's was open, but we do know that FNAF 2 was only open for a few short weeks. That fits the bill, and would mean that Circus Baby Pizza World opens up fairly quickly after FNAF 2 closes. Or at least is about to until the day before when Elizabeth gets scooped up by Circus Baby. But I also worry about 1992, mainly because that's really fast. Let's break it down here. We would need FNAF 2 to close in 1987, and then within 5 years, we would need William to develop the fun times, establish Circus Baby Pizza World with the help of investors as we hear in the beginning of the game and double down in the encyclopedia, have it close before the first day, do more experiments, have Michael functionally recover from the bite of 87, have him go down there, get scooped and come up looking for revenge, and have William open another Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. That feels like a lot. So part of me feels like 1998 is a better date. It gives us more time for all of this to happen. But do we have any more evidence to support that? Yeah, phone guy.
If I were forced to sing those same stupid songs for 20 years and I never got a bath.
Now, we don't know when the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened. We just know that it opened after Fredbear's and was closed sometime before 1987 when the second one opens up. 1992 would put the opening of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza at 1972 or around that time. And that feels like a pretty long gap. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would be open for at least 10 years. But 1998 puts the opening at 1978, a lot closer to the timeline we're already at. All in all, I think 1998 is the best date to place FNAF 1, which would date the entire Michael saga, except for exactly when Sister Location happens. Succinctly, I think it is most probable that Michael Afton goes to work at the FNAF 2 location soon after its investigation begins to try to open up the animatronics and expose what his father has done, only to get his frontal lobe bitten off in 1987. After he recovers, he follows his father's instructions to go down into the Sister Location bunker to finish his experiments for him, but is instead gutted and piloted by Ennard and is left for dead. He vows to hunt his father after that. At some point in the mid to late 90s, William attempts to lure the fun times back to a location to continue his experiments. He does this by opening a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with the original animatronics, the other pieces to the puzzle that Ennard has been trying to solve, the other halves of the split souls. Surely they'd take the bait, but instead in 1998, a son seeking revenge answers the call, a son no longer inhabited by the robots he's looking for. William shuts the place down and finally gives up on finding Ennard. If it wasn't with Michael, who knows where it is. Instead, he takes apart the original animatronics to try to get more remnant out of them before he leaves. But Follow Me shows us that he fails and becomes Springtrap. And the rest of this part 3 I mostly agree with. 25 years later, Fazbear Frights opens up. Michael finds William there and burns everything to the ground, but it doesn't work. Henry then steps in and does a way better job of it. After they all burn, Cassidy tortures William ad infinitum. It's also nice to think about time-wise. From the crying child's death to the fire that ends it all, it's a clean 40 years, with the game that began it all, FNAF 1, smack dab in the middle. Alright, but I hear you. If Michael doesn't burn down FNAF 1 and FNAF 2, why are the Phantom animatronics burnt? Well, I'm not 100% sure. I think it's a toss-up between two options. Either he goes back and does eventually burn FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 in that 25-year gap, or since he's already been haunted by these animatronics before, there's nightmares and hallucinations in his vision, only heightened by being within Fazbear Frights, a place surrounded by trauma-inducing images. Combine that with the fact that some of the first advice we receive in the game is that fire is a real danger here and a possibility. It could commingle, but to be fair, I'm not sure. I do have one more minor disagreement with the timeline, and that's the placement of Happiest Day. Personally, I think it makes more sense to happen at the end of the Follow Me minigames when all the spirits are in that room together. If you want to know why, go ahead and watch that video. Overall though, I think this timeline is pretty solid and I commend them on what they've done so far, and I'm excited to see what comes out on the 25th for part 4. But buckle your seatbelts because, to quote the man himself,
let's just say that you're either gonna love that episode or hate it.
Now for a huge shout out to the best patrons, the Toasted Slices, Emberisk, Charlie Bean, Lovey Puppy, Stormachow, Just BKZ, Chickpea, Lola Fembo, The Viper 26, Lehan, James Reiner, Emily De La Sierra, Givo, Snowblossom, Nika, Raven Eris, Glamrock Bonnie is a Nagani, Bucky Ray, Mariah R, Raz Van Rooks, Luce, Mystic Angel, The Idiot Central, Mac Dave, Phantom Plays, Emulatin, Inkline Game Studios, Memento Mortem, Supermoosh, Honore Johnson, Jackson Davis, I, Untrusted Life, Kevin's Adventures, Blake, John Man, Natty C, and King Coda. And until next time, as always, stay toasty, Slices.